This is Sam Electric Ghost, and we're live in the air with Jeff Dolan for the first time from Wave. And we just wanted to mention before we get into the interview that we're on Newsly, an iOS app, and you can use coupon code GHOST and you get 1 month free premium subscription. This podcast will be on Newsly, so you can stop scrolling and start listening. Use coupon code GHOST, get 1 month free premium subscription. So again, check that out after. Within about an hour, we'll be on Newsly. So thank you for being on the program tonight.
I love being on with the ghost, the man, the myth, the legend. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I've been podcasting since 2016. Started on a couple experiment, and then I moved to Anchor FM, and now we're using StreamYard with Anchor. And It's just been really fun. Yeah, I mean, I'm a musician, and typically we interview musicians. I'm a producer, and but we've been branching out to influencers, CEOs, all kinds of different types of people, going more into entertainment and an overall kind of the change in the podcast industry. We've kind of changed with the. But talk about like who you are. You're the CEO of Wave, and that's a cloud-based platform, and you help podcasters and other audio creators do marketing and keep it simple. But you've been a podcaster, you're a musician, you're also an award-winning filmmaker. So I wanted to kind of see how far we want to go into all that tonight, because we typically go, half hour to an hour, depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, so, we can go in any direction you want. I'm pretty I'm open. I just was on a podcast this morning, and we talked about all sorts of cool stuff. So we can talk music. I mean, this is my bass right here, the Music Man Stingray 5. So I'm a musician too. I had my day playing in bands, and we played everything from rock to jazz to acoustic, all sorts of stuff. So I miss it. I actually want to get back to playing my own music. I play on weekends.
But
awesome. There's nothing like playing your original music, right? So
yeah, I mean, you can see all my Moogs behind me.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm kind of an old school guy. I've got tons of Moogs and the Rolands.
Hey, you said it right too, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. My whole life I've been saying Moog, and I think it was like the Sun, like on Twitter was like, no, it's like Moog, like Vogue. And I was like, what?
Well, Dr. Robert Moog, he was a big inspiration to me. And I just was like, I was waiting. It took me until my 50s to finally afford a Moog. and then I got 3 of them. And then it's like I didn't turn back. But it was, I see a lot of musicians, they're in the box, they're in the DAW. And I'm a DAW-less guy. I use multi-tracks. I'm kind of old school. And people are like, oh, why are you doing it the hard way? I said, well, if you got a Moog, you might as well do it the hard way, because you want to capture what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, when that was coming out, I mean, that was truly like a new way to produce sounds, right? Because it's generating through electricity sounds and music that is completely original, that you can't get anywhere. And so when the computers started emulating it and coming out, right, where it was like, well, you can kind of make it sound like how you want to make it sound, they were still emulating the Moog, setup where you connect it. And that's why so many of the plugins in the software now are so complicated, because you actually have to know how to use the analog gear to actually use the software gear correctly, right?
Well, I like the controlled voltage, because it's like before MIDI there was controlled voltage, and I have it such that I can have an Arturia talking to a Roland, talking to a Moog, talking to a Make Noise Eurorack. So in my world, what I find is having that tactile feel of overriding that workflow, and actually hearing that saw wave or that triangle wave actually coming out of like an analog setup rather than a digital setup. There is a big difference. And people will get, oh, there isn't. Yeah. Once you have one and you hear it, there's difference. It's like a Fender guitar versus a Stratocaster versus a Rickenbacker, a Les Paul. They all have a character, and these Moogs, like if you go against the sequential circuit Prophet 5, it has character, and Oberheim has character.
Absolutely. I
And
had to actually I got humbled when I first tried to play one. I literally could not get it to make the sound that I wanted, and I was like, wow, like this is its own instrument. Like
so
I
thick.
literally am stumped. Like I could not get it to do what I wanted, and I was like, man, there's a huge learning curve here.
Yeah,
And I found out like that, yeah, like it's like any other
no
instrument. You got to learn
patches.
how to play it.
But there's no patch. I mean, if you get a Moog 1, they can do patches, right? But it's like $8,000. But like if you get like a modular, like monophonic, which I've got 3 monophonic Moogs, and they have a character. What I've learned is like I let them be who they are. Like I let them, like Robert
Nice.
Moog, he actually said that his machines had consciousness. If you read his
Oh,
papers, he felt like he was tapping into the universe. Very hippie like thinking for an inventor, for a guy
yeah.
who was like a doctor, a scientist, but he talked in kind of cosmic terms like Hendrix. And he was
Huh.
talking all this cosmic stuff, and you're like, wow, he's like Hendrix. But he built a machine that Keith Emerson and Rick Wakeman, they were driving at Bernie Worrell. They're driving it in that kind of way, So it makes sense
Mm,
that the guy who built it actually built it to be like even the models in the same range don't sound the same. It's like if you get a
wow.
Telecaster, they're all hand built, so they don't actually sound the same and they warm up. So
Mm,
when you turn them on, what it sounds like in the first 5 minutes, doesn't sound like what it sounds like 45 minutes into it. And so they're
right.
very point in time types of machines. That's why I put them down on tape, because
Mm,
then you have like a sound painting, like what Hendrix
yeah.
and George Martin talked about, was like the idea that do I record? I saw this documentary and it said George Martin was talking about the Beatles, and he said, well, I could have recorded them like they sounded in Berlin, like a live act. And we did. And then we decided, like, why don't we use the studio like Monet is a painter, like it make it impressionistic. And he
Mm,
had been working on Peter Sellers' comedy records. And the Beatles actually knew that George Martin had done that work. And on those records, he had tape loops, he had special effects, he had all these things. So when you start doing Rubber Soul and you start to get into Sgt. Pepper, he started to introduce those techniques using the studio like an instrument. And then the rest of the Beatles said, yeah, why don't we do those Peter Sellers things with a rock band? And that's where you
yeah.
get what you
Innovative.
got. Yeah, I mean that's
Absolutely. Yeah, and there was a similar moment in time that I remember. I'm trying to remember the year that Skrillex came out. Do you know the guy
yeah,
Skrillex?
yeah.
So it's a dubstep artist that um like I remember he had like 5 or 6 charting like dubstep songs when he came out. Like it just was
Mhm.
like one after another, and they were all different, almost
Yeah.
different genres of dubstep when it was coming out. And I
Mhm.
remember hearing that, and it blew me away because I realized that I was listening to the birth of a new music
Genre.
genre. Like
Yeah,
I literally was like, this guy has figured out how to use a laptop as an instrument and
yeah,
completely come up with a new like form of music, which is just baffling that we can still have artists come out with new sounds and new art forms, right? So super exciting. And I'm glad you pointed that out about the Beatles. And because I think that's where technology takes us, right? Like you get
yeah,
this new tool and you're like, what can I do with this? What kind of sounds can I make with it? And the musicians can make instruments out of just about anything. So
yeah, I mean, I'll
it's
take
always
it.
interesting to see what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the bands I was really into as a kid, because 'cause I'm a child of the 755, right? I saw Joy Division show up on MTV,
Oh,
right? And they were
yeah.
like they were so impressive to me because that's like the first time you hear this kind of new wave sound, right? You
Yeah.
had punk bands like The Clash, and you had bands like the Sex Pistols, but they were post-punk, and they actually introduced that kind of classic keyboard sound that you heard from Depeche Mode. Later, you heard from when they evolved in the New Order and Duran Duran. But they actually, when Love Will Tear Us Apart, that actually has the first kind of arrangement of that new wave kind of sound. like kind of heavy synth sound. You never hear it. It's
Was
like
that a
78.
Prophet?
No,
Was
it
that
was
a
actually
Prophet? What?
it was like a British synth. It actually
Oh,
was like
got
a
it.
British synth, or it was an Arturia. No, it wasn't that. It was either like an ARP. It was one of the ARPs. Like ARP had done a bunch of things. They go into the Odyssey. You know, you have the 2600 to 2500. You have an Odyssey. You have a
Right.
couple of them, like a Quadra. It was one of those. And
Mm.
they actually took it and they did that kind of classic thing that you hear. Like New Order ended up doing it themselves, and then The Cure and Depeche Mode and all those bands in that style. But they still had a punk edge though, because they still had like this kind of punk guitar going on.
Yeah.
It's heavier than in New Order. There's a lot more guitar in Joy Division, and I was very impressed with that kind of segue because I was really into the Clash. I
Mm.
love the Sex Pistols. I loved like what was going on with the Ramones, the CBGB scene, and I'm like, as a kid, I'm like, that's it, because I loved the Who. I was like, and like they were like the punks to me. I thought the Who were like better than Zepp because I like the attitude that Pete had. He had this kind of punk attitude, but then he did rock operas. So it was like he's a punk, but he's doing rock opera. It's like, what is that? It's kind of
Is
weird.
punk coming back? Like I heard something that like the punk scene was like starting to come back.
Yeah, well, I've talked to a lot of bands overseas, like in multiple areas, you know, from Japan to Australia and Sweden and Germany. There's a lot of metal and punk type of underground music that's not hitting the big scene. I talk to a lot of emerging artists, and the punk aesthetic's always been there. It's kind of like when Kurt Cobain brought it back, you know, because it was
Yeah.
gone, and then he brought it back, and grunge took over for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And
that that was my come up in the grunge era. Yeah.
but that to me was punk coming back, because I think they like all these hair bands like the Motley Crues and the Rats and all that, and the Guns N' Roses. They're fine, but people are like, you know, I want something more real, and like Crazy
Yeah.
Horse. I was always
Well,
like,
see,
I love, yeah.
my introduction to that whole thing was I remember going to the record store and there was the first Dave Matthews record.
Mhm.
Then there was Silverchair, Frog Stomp. Then there was Foo Fighters,
Foo Fighters, yeah. Yeah,
right?
Evolution of
The first
Nirvana.
Foo Fighters record,
Yeah,
right? And so that was like the post Kurt Cobain
era,
like
yeah.
resurgence. So that's kind of where I picked up and
I believe you picked it up. They kind of, you know, you have Alice in Chains. Yeah, the Pumpkins were kind of like grunge, but they're really more
Smashing
progressive.
Pumpkins, yeah.
But you had like, you know, like I really got into
Bush,
into Bush and Pearl Jam, and then
Pearl
you know
Jam, yeah.
Soundgarden, but
Yeah,
Soundgarden kind of channeled
Soundgarden,
like
yeah.
they channeled Zepp. You know,
Yeah, they did.
their grooves are
So did
like,
Silverchair, yeah.
yeah, Zepp type. You know, they're where like Pearl Jam and Nirvana were like sub pop. That's punk. They're really going punk. And even at 10, Nirvana, I mean, Pearl Jam went more punk. They actually went
And then you have
like,
Green
oh,
Day.
yeah, they're like the real punks. I mean, they're doing like the Ramones type punk, you know, and then they
Yeah,
later got
Green
into
Day
rock
was
pop.
like trying to stay true to the real punk, and then they kind of I don't even know
Went
where
off into
what
rock
direction they
opera
went.
like the Who. Yeah,
Yeah.
they ended up going to Townsend. Like the Townsend was like, oh, I gotta die before I get old, and then I'm gonna do Tommy, and then I'm gonna do Quadrophenia. And so he did these big progressive, massive shows that aren't really punk. That's not punk anymore. Like if
Yeah,
you like
yeah.
my generation, that's punk. You know, the Who sell out, that's like punk. That type of stuff is like really core. And then they get to these kind of big, overblown stuff, and it was powerful, and I liked it. But it kind of went away from like when the Clash showed up. It's like Pete even felt like, damn, they're actually doing me better than me. You
Yeah.
know, he got
And I
depressed.
mean, and the eras that we're talking about in music were very much controlled by the gatekeepers, the record
Mhm.
labels, to kind of not siphon, but like filter what the public was hearing, right? So you have the radio and like everybody was listening to the same music. And I think it was kind of a sad realization that I came to because I was in a big group of, you know, I mean, I don't know what ages, like mid 20s to early to mid 30s, right? And
Mhm.
all of them were singing songs from like 10 years ago, like
And the year
together as a
before.
group that they all
Yeah.
knew. And these are people from all over the world, right? And so it was actually, and it was Mr. Brightside, right?
Mhm.
And so we were all singing these songs, and I was realizing like, wow, today, what is that now? Like it's almost like it's fractured so much that there is no real collective bands that have come up, right? Like maybe a few, but like they're all being sourced from like TikTok now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I
So you
mean,
have like,
you don't get the record company. Like, Zeppelin was created by Page, and he was a studio musician, and he went and handpicked everybody, and then that became this massive machine. And you have all these other, the Aerosmith and all those. They were pushed because that's like the
yeah,
hard rock scene, and there was a lot of money behind putting like an AC/DC and Aerosmith in front of people, Styx, all those type of journeys in front of people. Now the taste
yep,
has kind of shifted where rock isn't the dominant genre. Hip hop
nope,
and all kinds of electronic music into trap and all heavy bass, all kinds of stuff. It's like all over the place. There's world music. There's like
right,
very, very diverse genres. And I'm very much into an expansive sound. I like to mix jazz and fusion and punk aesthetic. And it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I can go to New York and do what I do, and I can get 400 or 500 people to show up. And I'm doing not what is common. I like to do stuff like Genesis and like the Peter Gabriel version of Genesis. Stuff
nice.
that's like funkadelic. Like
But I
that's
mean,
that's
look at how
why.
back, like how far back you have to go for enough people in a room together to all know the song,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And that's what
yeah.
I'm
I mean,
saying. Like there's very few songs now where, like, if
you
I
have to
played the
wait.
top TikTok artists right now, there's only a small demographic of people that would all be like, "Oh,
I know
yeah, I know that
that.
song."
Yeah.
Right? But, like, there's a whole generation of people that would just be like, I don't know what you're talking about." Right?
Oh yeah, they don't have no idea. Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. That's the problem is when you have like reels and TikTok driving the music rather than like actually like I don't know, like a hardcore fan of rock or a hardcore fan of fusion jazz or a hardcore fan of the blues. They get a guy. You get these Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like, how would a Stevie Ray Vaughan make it today? He would make it within his core group of fans, but he would
Well, he
never
would have to
probably
get
get.
on TikTok, and he would
Yeah.
have to put out 3
Oh,
TikToks a day.
yeah.
And eventually, he'd get enough fans where a record label would reach out to him and say, "Hey, can we do a deal?" And then maybe he would open for somebody for real on the circuit. And after years and years and years, then he would maybe become famous, but maybe not. But I
Yeah.
mean, here's the other thing. I don't know if you're seeing the trend, but because of TikToks and Instagrams of the world and the YouTube shorts, that short video format, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
amount of talent that's surfacing with these algorithms that are finding these like amazing musicians and talent, like it is mind numbing how good some of these people are.
Yeah.
And I
I
don't
mean,
know that the engine of our day would have even found some of these people.
I
Like
think, yeah,
maybe, but
we do get a lot of diverse people, and we do get people that the gatekeepers wouldn't have brought in. And it's
yeah,
just a question of whether the attention span for like what I found is really interesting in hip hop, you still have the attention span for an album. You get the Kendrick
right.
Lamars, you get
Yeah.
the Tyler the Creators, you get the Earl Sweatshirts, you get the Frank Oceans. People will listen to the whole thing. So
Yeah.
then when you get the A&R guy saying, "Oh, all you can do is Spotify singles and only 2-minute songs," that doesn't like, well, how does Kendrick Lamar get everybody to listen to his record? How does Tyler? So the idea that you can make these maps and say, "Oh, that's only what you should do," that's what I don't like when people try to force that, because if you don't know, it's kind of like a Bohemian Rhapsody. Freddie Mercury had to force that. The record company didn't want that to come out. He forced it because he paid for the video, and then the
Yeah.
TV
I mean,
stations put it up. And
look
then
at
the guy,
Ye. I mean, Ye and Rockefeller. Like that documentary, I don't know if you saw it on Netflix,
mm,
where he's like No one's listening to me. Like, I'm a signed artist and I'm a proven producer, but nobody will take me serious as an artist.
Mhm.
And he goes into the record label and plays his song, and the receptionists are like, yeah, whatever. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
it's just, I've been plugging away, and I just found podcasting to be this other venue that actually pushes my brand. I'm a musician. I've got tons of music, but my podcast reaches more than my music. And then when I do my podcast, people actually listen to my music. So it's
that's
better
cool.
than buying bots. It's better than
Yeah.
it actually gets people say, well, who's this ghost? And then I'll talk to musicians, I'll talk to people like you, and then they're like, oh, and then they see my podcast, they see my music, and they check me out. So
Yeah,
that's how I is
it's a
that my
great
pitch.
model. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a
that's
great
how it,
model. It's a great model because you can get to know you as the person, not just like your music, but you get to know who's behind the music, which I think is cool. And then if you're a producer and they like you and they want to work with you and they like your philosophy of music, then they can get you to produce a record, right?
yeah. I'm actually working with a Japanese producer, working with a South African video game developer on a soundtrack, and I'm working with an
Nice.
experimental R&B producer, all because I've had people come on my podcast, or I had people see my
Yep.
podcast, and then they reached out to me. I've talked to 2 Grammy award-winning producers, Billy Hume and Kevin Stratton. I had them on my
Nice.
show, and, Kevin Stratton was behind, the band, Toto in the song Roseanne. He worked with Eddie Van Halen on Jump, worked on the programming
Nice.
for the Yamaha DX7 synthesizer. It was actually instrumental in how that synthesizer got programmed back in the day.
Cool.
So I've
That's
been
awesome.
able to get to people that I never thought I would get to. And then,
100%.
yeah, and then get
Yeah,
the people.
podcasting opens
Yeah,
so many doors like that,
yeah,
and I think that's even the collaboration between artists. Like, you'll hear, like, one of the strategies is like, because it's so easy now with the phone to just be
mhm,
like, hey, just pick up your phone, reach out, slide in the DMs, say, hey, check
yeah.
out my music. I'd love to collab with you. It's so easy now to do that.
Yeah, you don't
That
have to go through the gates. I mean, what used to be is
Yeah,
like you have to go through the agent and the manager, and they'd say, "Oh, you're not a good fit for the image." Now, like I'm talking to a Japanese producer, we're DMing each other on Instagram,
that's
we're
awesome.
going and having Skypes. I'm working with somebody on, talking to a video game developer on WhatsApp, and I'm gonna get to do like an hour-long soundtrack for
That's killer.
independent game, and
So cool.
I'm not going through the gatekeepers, and
Right.
that's the big change I think in the industry. The fact that I can reach an independent game developer, and I didn't have to have my agent get a cut, and I didn't have to have anybody,
100%.
and then I get to just do that, and
Yeah.
that right there to me is like what I tell the young people is like, yeah, you don't be scared to ask or
Yes.
tell somebody you like on my Instagram. My old pitch was like anybody that liked a post, I have a pitch and say you want to come on a podcast. But I started building up my audience. Now, when I see somebody I like, I don't feel scared to approach them. And then I'll
Right.
show one of my podcasts with like the fact that I interviewed Billy Hume. And if you're a
Yeah.
musician and you realize, oh, he got a Grammy, then you're like, well,
Yeah.
maybe I should talk to Mr. Ghost guy.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but yeah, then
And
I'm able to
it's
kind of just use that.
there's so many doors that open too because of your music too, right? Like, so if you're an artist and I mean, what's the first thing that somebody's going to do? If you reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, I'd like to collab. Here's my ideas." You drop 2 or 3 ideas on them. "Hey, I'd like to do a collab, da 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 da. Can you do some bars on my, song, or can I
Mhm.
play on your record or whatever?" First thing they're going to do is click on your profile, right? They're going
Yeah,
to click
yeah,
on, they're going to see what you're up to, they're going to see your latest post. So, I mean, it's a huge opportunity if you're doing the work and making the music that if you're talented and you're working, like, you're going to make those connections. And it's just a numbers game. Like, just keep reaching out. Like you just said, don't be afraid, reach out, and you never know what those connections are and who's listening. And then all of a sudden you're collabing with your dream
yeah, dream
people
collab.
that you're, yeah.
Yeah, because there were bands I didn't know if I could actually reach. There's this group called the Soap Girls out of South Africa. These 2 girls, they're sisters, and they do this kind of
Huh.
punk thing like L7, like they
Huh.
kind of do it like a Joan Jett, type of old school type of thing. And
Interesting.
I just reached out to him, and they've been on the show twice, and then
Nice.
and I got this French couple that there's a flautist and a drummer called Roseway, and I thought they were phenomenal. It was really, really good. And I just they like my post. They like some of my songs. We dig each other. I'm like, and I'm a fan. I was a fan when I got him
Yeah.
on the show, and I just didn't want to gush. But I was like, I just, I'm a fan and I'm a musician. And when I was able to get a band I dig to actually come on my show, it was like, that's like, wow, I did it.
Yeah. I mean,
That's a-
think about it. Like
no,
like you're saying before, you would have to go through agents, you'd have to do all these things just to talk to the person would be
yeah,
impossible,
you couldn't
right?
even get to them. You
Yeah, and
couldn't
now
even
you
get
can
so
talk
many
to them, you
layers.
can create content with them. I mean, and there's so many different ways that musicians can collab with non-musicians too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So now you have the dynamic of like, hey, I'm a comedian, I'm an actor, I'm doing a short film, I'm doing a video game, I'm doing right? Like there's so
Yeah, yeah.
many ways that
You
you
get the
can
advertisers,
collaborate now.
I started getting companies that wanted me to do little clips because, everything has music. Like, if you think about it, everybody's like, "Well, how am I gonna get my music? It's so hard." But how much music is used in advertising? How many films have, like, little pieces that you need tons of people to do the work? You have
Yep.
independent films, you have TV, you have video games, you have tons of content that needs musicians, and, there's a group of people who try to keep the control of that. But the big equalizer is, the TikTok and the Instagram and the reels and the shorts. And then when
Yep.
producers go like, "Oh, I like this ghost guy, or I like what this guy's doing," then you start getting work, and you're like, "Well, I didn't even know I was going to get that work," and
Yeah.
it just starts happening, and just because you can't be scared to kind of throw it at the wall. I mean, I write a lot, and I just decided Prince was known for not knowing what to put out, and he
Mm,
he would sometimes pick the wrong thing,
mm.
and sometimes you just got to throw it at the wall. So when you got
Yeah.
later in his life, he just threw everything at the wall. Now all of his stuff is out, you know, stuff
I
that
talked to
they never wanted to put
yeah,
out.
I yeah, to that point, I think you're right. You should put it all out. And I talked to a producer of one of the top podcasts in the industry about a month ago, and he was saying that they did a test and they said, we are going to curate our best clips of our podcast, right? And we're going to put only the best ones that we think are the best on social media, right?
Mhm.
And then they said, okay, for this month, we're going to just chop everything up randomly and put it out.
Yeah.
Good, bad,
But
and indifferent. Like we don't even know like half the time if it's even right. We're just going to clip it and put it out. They said clips that they had they thought for sure this would
we're
flop
no
were the
good.
ones that
Yeah.
like took off and went viral, right?
That's what I try to tell people. Like if you're a musician and you take a year to do one song and you've got 100 in the can, you're really shooting yourself in the foot because you have no idea that your fans like almost everything you don't put out. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell young producers all the time. It's like all that stuff you think is too much. Like how did Kurt Cobain came up? How did these Paul Westerberg from the Replacements? How did they get out there? Because they put the stuff out. You gotta
Well, look at
be willing.
the modern day example right now. I think he's on tour, or I just saw he's in Egypt, or he's the first solo musician to play in the pyramids in Egypt, Russ.
Oh, that's yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know if you know who Russ is, but he was like, trying to break in. I think he was living with his parents, and he was like,
Mhm.
man, I want to be a musician, but like, I don't, nobody knows me or whatever. So he decided, and this was around the time that Casey Neistat was putting out like a vlog a day. And so
Mhm.
Russ was like, all right, fine. I'm going to do a new song, not just like a clip. I'm talking like
New
a
songs
full
every
song every day. And he
day.
cranked out a new song every day. I think he did it for either a year or 2 years. But
Wow.
think about that.
Yeah,
And so
I
that
yeah.
alone was like, what? And then he got on some podcasts. Gary Vee talked him up. And then all of a sudden, he was on the stage and people were like, and now
Well,
he's an independent artist doing his own thing.
that is the technique. I mean, I've been plugging away in my studio. I put out pretty like 4 or 5 songs a week. I
Wow.
just I live my studio is in my bedroom. And
That's
I
cool.
just so I'm kind of like Hendrix, he's big, big inspiration. And he used to sleep with his guitar. It's kind of, not in kind of connotation that he was like with his guitar, but the fact that he cared about the music so much, he wanted to be able to just get up and write.
Yeah.
And a lot of musicians have that home studio because they want to just, if it comes to them, they don't want to have to get in the car and go. They want to be able to just put it down. And that's kind of where
True.
my head is like, I like having access to all my stuff and just do it if I wake up at 2 a.m. and just put it down. And
Yeah.
because that's kind of like when it happens, like it just comes out of nowhere. And sometimes the
Yeah.
stuff that you don't torture yourself on as I get older, that the things that just come naturally usually work better. They usually like the
Right.
stuff that I have to sit down and like, oh, I want to turn this into something that usually fails. It's like usually
Yeah.
the thing that just came out of nowhere. That's the thing that usually works. And I was
Yeah.
like, I kind of been like, okay, let's go with that. And
Right.
trying to get like realize that like being on that grid and trying to make it perfect, that's like the first mistake. Because if you think about Keith Richards, was he ever doing that? Is that how he wrote? I don't think so. So
Yeah.
if you want to really get it down, you like think the way like Keith kind of ramshackle way of doing it. That's kind of core. That's how you really get it done.
Yeah. The
So you might
repetitions
not
for
want to live
sure.
that way.
Yeah, it's a repetitions. I mean, and it makes you improve more rapidly too, right? I think a lot of the artists that maybe they're not that good, right, when they start, and they put out a few things, nobody really gives them any time of day, but they haven't developed as an artist yet. And if they get the reps in, they'll get better. And then people start leaning in and be like, oh, actually, they're pretty good, right? But they won't know unless they go through the reps. And
Yeah,
so
yeah. You
a
have to
lot of
flip
times you
through it.
still have to develop as an artist, and those reps getting in every day are going to help you grow. And yeah, it's just you got to put in the work.
Yeah, if you just put the work in to kind of develop your style, I'm a big fan of like just learning how to just build, and I one of my techniques is I like to just go live from my home
Yeah.
studio. I've got multiple webcams, and I do live rehearsals. And what I find, and I
Nice.
tape them, and it's
That's
something I
cool.
read to Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa, his primary way of writing songs with the mothers was that he would tape everything when he went to do. He was in the studio. If he's on stage, he would bring his multi tracks and like I'm going to tape everything, and he would go back to his house and he would listen to all the tapes and say, well, I'm going to take part of this live show and part of this studio session, and he would start mixing and matching them, and then say, hey, that's the song, and
That's
I'm like,
good.
that to me is like that actually drives your creativity because you start to assess your own work, you start to learn
Man.
about what you're good at,
And you get
and
live feedback. I mean,
yeah,
that is actually, I don't know why. I mean, I see artists all the time going live, right?
mhm,
Either it's on Reddit or Twitter Spaces or whatever. There's all sorts of people going live, but I hadn't thought about the fact that you can go live on your practices. Because I used to
yeah,
record all our band practices. Because, like you
yeah,
said, you'll get jamming in a room, and all of a sudden, like it
something
just starts
happens.
flowing. And you're like, man, that was hot. Did we get that on tape? Like, oh
Yeah,
shoot.
that's the problem. It's like what I learned because I had bands from the time I was 17. We'd be in the basement, in the garage, and we had multi tracks. And it's kind of like what I learned back then was like, the last 15 minutes of every rehearsal, we finally had the song. And
Yeah.
so I would always be like, and we kind of got into a point where we're fooling around. And then by the last 15 minutes of the tape, we finally gelled the idea, and that usually is the song. And
Yeah.
I still kind of have that thing where I'll work something out. I usually do like an hour live. By the last 15, 20 minutes, I've hit the kind of groove and I say, that's the song. And I'll actually focus on it and construct it. And usually, maybe there's a couple nuggets at the beginning or the middle, but it's just because I'm a writer. And so I kind of like, oh, I've been listening to myself and I was like, oh, okay, that's it. But I get the feedback from my fans,
Yeah.
and a lot of my albums, like my last album, Peg Forever, most of the songs were recorded that way. They were recorded
Mm,
on a multi-track into probably like the last 15 minutes of an hour-long rehearsal that I
wow.
went back and remastered and overdubbed or something. But most of them have that kind of live feel. And it really, because I like bands like Crazy Horse and the Allman Brothers and the old school bands, that's a lot of what they did. Elton John, like he said, the Yellow Brick Road was recorded in a mansion, all mic'd up. Everything's like third, second take.
Just jamming. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
really, if you listen to the albums that were recorded that way, there's something magic about that period
True.
because they were recorded that way.
Well, yeah, and I'm trying to remember. There's a guy that's he's actually hilarious. His name is Mark Riblet. I think that's how you say it. Riblet. Anyway, he's a musician that goes live and just totally off the cuff makes up this music. And sometimes he'll play for 2-3 hours, right?
Yeah.
And he's amazing. Like, he's super talented at just making up music and playing. And he'll sing and everything. Like, he'll create beats, loop them, sing over it, like super talented. And he'll have guests on to do this too. So he'll literally have like other artists join him to just do it live in the room with him, right? And so
that's what I like,
yeah, and so I was like, man, this is like brilliant. Well, then one day he announced, I'm gonna do, I'm creating this new studio. I'm gonna have a party, and he invited like, I don't know how many people. It looked like it was like 10 or 15 people, but he had like a little studio audience there.
Oh wow,
and so he invited them to come, and he literally was like with this other famous artist. And they were just going to sit in this room and just like ideate and just come up. And they had all these instruments in the room. They were just going to tinker around all day long, record the whole thing.
Like consciousness.
It was like an 8-hour just like come
jamming.
In, party, drink.
That's kind of like what the Grateful Dead used to do. Every show was like that.
Oh, that's
If you think about the Grateful Dead, you think about Funkadelic. When they used to go on stage, that's what it was. A lot of these bands, they were channeling like a Miles Davis Bitches Brew or Herbie Hancock type of stuff. That's what a lot of experimental jazz musicians, that's what they do. I mean, they got a core idea and then they deviate and they come back to it. And then jam bands and psychedelic bands and funk bands, James Brown band. I mean, that's what they did. I mean, most of the songs are all jams. Almost every James Brown song is a jam that he finally tightened up, in the studio, and then they got cut. If you listen to the original, they're like 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
And then they cut them down to the last 3 minutes where he finally gelled, like I said, and James would be like, "Oh, that's the song." And then when you get some,
and what's brilliant, and what's brilliant about that is, you don't even like today's day and age. Your fans will cut the parts and make those go viral.
Yeah,
right.
That's
so like Mark Riblet has a clip where, and it was funny because I watched this live, but he had this clip where he's like, it's like a wake up clip where he's like basically singing like, "Get up, get out of bed," and like he's singing this thing and it's hilarious.
And they grabbed it.
And he's like, "Get up, get out of bed." And then this techno beat comes on. It's like, ding, 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 it's like, "Get up." And so people have clipped that out of his 2-hour live thing, and it's going super viral. And people are like, "This is my ringtone in the morning when I want to wake up."
That's what you want, because that's what you don't know. That's why I tell people, like, going live and have people see your happy accidents and see your kind of stream of consciousness is like, why I like the White Album from the Beatles was like, they did all the Sgt. Pepper and Rubber Soul. Then the White Album was like, oh, let's do it. Let's just do it live. And it's like really raw. Or like Crazy Horses, like Tonight's the Night. That's a very raw kind of live, just let them stay on the record. And that's what it is. And I'm a big fan of, Lou Reed and the Velvets, like White Light, White Heat is about 25 minutes of like white noise on one side. And it's like, what is that? But it's the fact that he did it, inspired tons of punk rockers to say, I can go and do that. I can go be a television or be like the Talking Heads. And it would be people to be like, oh, I can actually experiment. And I don't just have to do songs about loving my girlfriend or my girlfriend left me. I can do something more like the dark underbelly of New York. And
I mean,
like a writer,
There's crazy new genres that I didn't even know about until this year. Like ASMR is a thing. Do you know what that is?
I think my daughter told me about it, but I haven't really get into it yet. I didn't really get into it, but
I can't even describe it. Just look it up. ASMR. It's like just look it up. Just Google it. There's like,
I want to check it out.
This whole new genre of like sound that is ASMR, and it's basically like I can do it right now. It's just like
Oh, just playing with sounds and sampling them. Like a lot of like an old 60s, like a lot of bands like like Pink Floyd and if you listen to Yes, they used to take recorders and just record all kinds of strange stuff, just put them on tape loops and then run them.
But
It's part progressive rock.
this is like people whisper,
Oh,
right?
Whisper, and then they
And they
grab that.
make these like soothing sounds. And I think what it is like people, the distractions of life, right? They just want to go to like a place that they can feel like they can just kind of chill out and zone
Oh,
out.
so it's for like somebody like meditation type music.
Yeah,
So
it's almost
yeah.
like meditation, but there's different genres of it that are some are weird and some are not, but some are just like brushes like on stuff. But like I couldn't go too deep into it. I was like, man, I don't
Yeah,
know. Some
yeah.
of
I
this
mean,
stuff's getting kind of weird.
I've been with the guys that like they try to get the sound off of a mushroom. They put electrodes on a mushroom and then they try to capture it into a scent. They put electrodes on
Nice.
a piece like a leaf and try to pull the sound signals off it, and you actually can. And
Oh,
so
really?
yeah. So I know this artist named Waterflower from Latvia, and her whole thing is that she uses synthesizers and she uses these special electrodes to pick up sounds off of plants and mushrooms and like all
What?
kinds of organic stuff, and she actually uses it in her music, and it's
Whoa.
super fantastic. It's kind of like Bjork, but she's
Yeah.
actually using plants for real. Like
What?
Bjork has all this really interesting stuff, but she actually goes and connects all kinds of special synthesizer electrodes to fit like organic living things, and then
Man,
gets
I
the
gotta get it.
signal off of
I'm
them.
behind the times over here, man. I gotta
Yeah, I
know
always
what's
talk to weird, all kinds of cool emerging things, but yeah, she's
that's
I,
awesome.
yeah, well, that's a
So I'm like,
newfound
what does it
sound.
sound like?
Well, some things have like a like rhythm. They have like a rhythm. There are some like plants that have like a rhythm to them. When you're connected to the synth, it actually creates like a beat, and you can use that beat. And it's like
What?
it's yeah, it's very strange, that, but it's not unexpected because if you actually check, there's a lot of things that have almost all organic living things have some kind of signal. It
Huh.
depends on how you pick it up, and then you can manipulate it and then kind of invert it or try to make it more musical than it is. So it could be coming in, and then you could throw it through an LFO, and then you could throw it into
Right.
a random voltage generator and add more to it. But you could
Yeah.
take what's coming in and then run it through my subtractive synthesis on my Moog and make it even more than what it was. But the fact that it's like a
Right.
source, it ends up being the
Yeah, yeah,
source,
yeah.
like an oscillator is the source.
It's the seed. Yeah.
It's the seed and you can use it. But it just makes you think in different ways. And that's the kind of whole idea of being an experimental musician. I like to just take sound waves and start from sound waves. I like to sample my own synth into a sampler and then deconstruct it and invert that sound wave and rip it apart and turn it inside out and then make it come back to me in a different way that I didn't expect. And that's
Yeah.
why I spent a lot of time just experimenting with waves and getting them to go through different things. And I call it expansive sound experiments because one day I could be coming from a punk aesthetic, next day I could be channeling Sun Ra, or I could be channeling Pink Floyd, or whatever I want. If I want to sound
Yeah.
like Johnny Cash, I want to do some Prison Blues type of song, I'll go that way. But if I want to go and like do I want to do something like what Tyler's doing or Earl's doing, sure, I'll go that way. It's kind of what I feel like,
That's cool.
and I
Yeah, a
think
lot of
people should
people are
be allowed to
remixing
have that.
stuff.
Yeah.
They're remixing, voices, they're tweaking voices. I mean, there's so much happening right now. Um, yeah, it's exciting. Super cool.
So I know you've got a company we had up here for a while, and I want to understand, like, how do you help like audio creators and podcasters? You know, since we probably should kind of point that out to people since they've
Yeah.
seen your
Yeah,
link
so
there and we haven't
so
talked about.
yeah, Wave is a really simple tool to help audio creators make social media content. So if you think about having an MP3 file and sharing it on say Instagram, right?
Mhm.
You can't. Like you have to have a video. And so
Yeah.
we just we take your song and we put it with a picture and we put it with some animation that matches your audio signal. And then you
Oh,
make
so
what's
we can
called
do
an
that.
audiogram. And so you can post that on all your socials as a musician, not without having to worry about creating video, right? So there's a lot of audio first creators that are getting dragged kicking and screaming into the video creation world. And as you know, probably one of the reasons why we're live right now is because the editing process on video is just impossible. It takes forever, right? And you
Hmm.
have to have the camera and the gear and all. There's a whole nother layer of work
Yeah.
involved that a lot of musicians and artists and podcasters just don't want to mess with. So we make it super easy to just be like, look, get your album cover, your podcast cover, a good picture of yourself that you have, right? And put it with your audio, and we'll make a video out of it so you can put it on social media. So
Well,
just
that's a
a,
cool thing.
yeah,
Because
simple.
I mean, I had because I wanted to, I noticed that I had to have reels, and I actually been visual for since like 2016. So what I used to do, and my secret sauce is I've got my iPhone. I got like 4 different video apps on my iPhone, and I won't go into which ones they are. But and then I take a live video of me playing. Then I run
Yep.
it into these apps and totally distort it into something that doesn't even look recognizable to what I did. And then I basically go and layer and layer and layer through multiple apps, and then I go and I take a mastered version of my sound and replace the audio that's on that video with some tools that allow me to take like a high quality wave file and bring it in. So I mean, I learned
Mhm.
how to do that art myself, so I do it. So, but
Yeah.
if I wanted to have something that's more less psychedelic and less crazy, because my stuff is very weird. If I
Yeah.
wanted something more normal, then maybe I would look at what you guys are doing, because I've kind of gone into this thing where, oh, I can turn this stuff into like old San Francisco hippie world, but
Right.
or like the exploding inevitable, like what like Andy Warhol was doing with the Velvets, because my taste is to kind of do something kind of weird.
Yeah, and that's super cool. Like I'd love to develop some waves that look like that, some animations that look like that as well. Um, so we do have musicians that use us for sure. Um, but yeah, I mean there's all sorts of different ways you can cut it, but obviously you have video skills, so you're in a different breed of creator. But there's a lot of folks that
Yeah,
um,
don't. Yeah, I
they
know.
know, and myself included, right? Like as a busy CEO and executive, like it's hard to put out social media on the regular. And so having tools that allow you to do it quickly and easily is like welcomed,
So do
right?
you
It's like,
actually get into like scheduling this stuff so it goes out, or are you just into creating it and then the person figures out when they're gonna put it out?
yeah, so we're in the beginning stages of building all that out. So yeah, in the future, we definitely want to move towards helping you do it. We do have a Zapier integration right now, a Zapier integration that lets you automate it. So if you wanted to, like for podcasters,
Mhm.
where if your podcast gets put out on Anchor or Spotify
Mhm.
or whatever, it automatically posts it to YouTube for you.
Oh, cool.
Um, and then, so we have some things that you can automate like that, but we don't have it built in yet. But yeah, we're working on that. And then for a musician, you could probably do something where you just drop a folder into like Google Drive and it'll post it, to YouTube for you. So
Well, that's
it
pretty cool.
depends how you set up the automation.
That's awesome. Yeah, 'cause I can see a lot of people I talk to who are kind of like more performance oriented. Because I'm kind of like from the school of thought where I like I grew up with vinyl, so I grew up looking at those Zeppelin covers with the cutouts and stuff, and like, oh, I want to do.
Nice.
So I actually got into art, and my daughter's an artist, and my wife's an artist. So I'm around like graphic artists in my house, and so
Nice.
my daughter did my shirt. She did this
Oh,
logo,
cool.
and
Nice.
we're all into like different types of art, and like we're all challenging each other like through multiple genres. My
That's
my
awesome.
my wife is more of a, she does the theater, and she does like vocal stuff and a lot of like art, like more film. I do
Yeah.
music, but I do some art. And my daughter is a sequential graphic artist working on a graphic novel. So
Oh, wow.
she actually has created multiple logos for me. In fact, like one of my logos, what I forgot to put, this one of them.
Nice.
Uh, I'll bring them up.
That's cool.
That one. If you see my logo just popped up
Yeah.
on the
Yeah,
screen,
that's
and then
cool.
the other one is this one that she created. This one, which is the known one for us, but she also created this ghost with like the Jack Kirby dots on it. You know, if you know,
Yeah.
but Jack Kirby was famous for making these cosmic dots that
Oh,
were
yeah.
around the Silver Surfer and Galactus. And anytime some of the supervillain had Doctor Doom was like throwing all this energy, he'd have these things called Kirby dots. And it's kind of a known thing
Nice.
within the Marvel universe, the old classic
Mhm.
world of like having that thing. And my daughter said, "Yeah, I'm going to put a bunch of Kirby dots around your ghost." So he's like he's a bad ghost.
Nice, nice.
but yeah, but yeah, I think it's cool what you're offering because, like I said, a lot of musicians that I know during the pandemic they had a hard time because they were bands. They were like classic type structure where they had a drummer, bass player, guitar player, and they really didn't make videos other than them just playing. You know, that's
Yeah.
what they do. If they do a video, it's just them playing a performance. They never did
Yeah.
like concept videos, never did stuff like that. So if they, and they had a hard time trying to get out there without being able to, if they were locked down, and then the drummer couldn't get to the studio, then they couldn't do anything. And then
Yeah.
then you ended up having like, well, maybe the singer started going into Pro Tools and started creating stuff, and then, whoa, I need a video, and so I need to do a video for the solo record, and I don't know how to do that. So I know a lot of guys are kind of like that kind of situation. So yeah, I think what you're offering to like audience and other bands I've interviewed, if you guys are watching me now, you ought to check this out because I think this is exactly the kind of thing you guys need.
Yeah, and it's so easy, like, you can put it out at scale, right? It's really easy, and you don't need it's all in browser. You don't have to download anything, you have to learn it's no large learning curve, where there's, like, a big editor and you gotta, like, do all like, it's super just straightforward, and so we're trying to eliminate all the barriers to putting out social content. So, we have people that are just don't want to use computers, don't like computers, don't want to learn any technology, and they're doing it real easy. So
Yeah, well, that's the
it's
cool
for
thing
those
about
people.
modern technology. If you got an iPad or you got your phone, you don't have to go onto your laptop and have to take a tutorial. Like the thing that's going to make a musician just turn off is like, oh, watch this 40-minute video to figure out how to use it. And we're like, no, no.
Yeah.
That right there is a no.
Well,
That's going to do the no
I
right there.
just did this the other day, right? I sat down. I just got this this thing right here. It's called the Lumi. Have you ever heard of
Oh,
this?
oh, what is that thing?
It's this little tiny keyboard.
Oh, I know what that is. Yeah, that's actually really cool. Yeah, that is a very
It's
cool
super
thing.
cool, but like, I mean,
How
yeah,
to
like
get
just sitting
it to
down,
work.
like, okay, how do I get this into my DAW and how do I hook it up? And like, 2 hours later, I'm like, dang it, like I was
Well, the
supposed to be
thing about
creating
that
and
thing that
now,
I heard, the big claim to fame on that, I'm gonna get a little nerdy, is the fact that it has polyphonic aftertouch. I think there's a version of it that has polyphonic aftertouch. And if anybody's a total nerd on synthesis, it's a type of synthesizer capability that left synthesizers, like big
huh?
synthesizers like the GX1 from Yamaha and the CS80 had it. And the thing about it means you could actually take your finger and wiggle the key, and
Yes,
wiggling the key would actually have it do a vibrato. Or you
correct.
could assign that to an oscillator, you could assign it to an LFO, you could assign it to an envelope, you assign it to different things. Stevie
Yeah,
Wonder
it's amazing.
had this one awesome machine called GX1, and it had 3 layers. It's a polyphonic analog synthesizer. He did like songs in the key of life on it. And one of the rows was totally polyphonic aftertouch, and you could wiggle the key, you could press the key down. It had all these foot pedals that can control the key, and then tons of things you could route to that behavior. Like,
Yep.
and you had sliders and dials and switches that could automatically say, "Oh, oscillator 2 is going to get affected if you wiggle your key," or the envelope
That's
generator
cool.
is going to get affected if you do it. And that thing was like a $300,000 machine that he got Barry
Oh
Gordy
my
to buy him for
gosh.
just for that record. And there's only 10
Dude.
of them that ever were built. And like Keith Emerson
Wow.
had one, he had one, a couple other people had them. But like the fact that still hasn't shown up on Roland's, hasn't shown up on Yamahas again. It's on this Chinese synth called a Hydra synth. It's the only
Well,
like
the
famous.
Lumi has it. I mean, the
Yeah, the
Lumi, that
Lumix.
thing,
Yeah,
you
it has it.
can wiggle and you can rub your finger up the key and down and lean it to the right, and it'll change the sound. And it's killer. I mean,
Yeah, it's a
it
really
is an
like we've
amazing
been
instrument.
waiting for like Roland and Yamaha or in Korg to put that back in their synths. Because if you
Mm,
get that back in a big synth that somebody uses on stage, like it's cool that independent guys we can get these Loomies and stuff, but if you actually put it back into the big boards, then
yeah.
you actually could get like the Keith Emerson type of player, like the Rick Wakeman level player, to actually
Mm.
show you what you could do with that.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and then you
Right.
saw Stevie Wonder. He showed people what he could do with it, like on songs like "The
Yeah.
Key to Life" and "Intervisions." You could hear what he was doing. But that if you can see somebody at that level of talent show you what is possible, then it could get the
Right.
kids. They're like, "Oh, I could pull a Herbie Hancock on," you know,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
That's what you want the kids to kind of like. Oh, maybe I should get off the DAW and get back on the key
Well,
and actually see what
they
I can do with the
eh,
keys.
have you seen these kids now with and I don't I'd imagine this is not new because I was kind of playing with it back in the day, but where you can play a- an instrument like a guitar and it
Mhm.
sounds like a violin or a piano
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something else, right?
yeah, yeah.
I
That
mean,
that's
some of
that.
this stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of emulators now that you have guitar sense, you have violins that can trigger sense, you have wind instrument controllers that can basically, emulate like a sax or a flute or anything. Or you can take that wind emulator and actually act like it's a violin. So you could take a
Right. And
Yamaha
I've seen guys
Roland.
do that like with their hands. Like they have like
Yeah.
a motion sensor and they're like
Oh yeah, Moog has a
like
theremin. Yeah, Moog has a famous instrument called the theremin. The theremin is an instrument that actually has an antenna, and you wave your hands in front of it, and
yes, that's it.
it does synthesis. It's an analog synth. It's really cool because if you have somebody who doesn't know how to play an instrument, but they get a theremin and they learn what it does with that range of hand motion,
That's
you
awesome.
can actually become a really good player with learning what motions and where you put your hands next to it, and you can actually control things. You can actually set it because
So
it's a
cool.
real synth, and you can set it
Yeah.
to do things based on your hand movement. So it's a really cool tool if you're somebody that's inventive and you say, "Well, I don't know how to play a piano, but I've got all these ideas." That's a really cool instrument to get because then you could like, "Oh, I could just totally do all these unconventional things, and I have ideas." And then once you sat down and
Yeah.
you did it. I always encourage people just to like do that. Even on if you think about hip hop people, a lot of them don't know how to play piano, but they got these matrices. They got these pads and they'll pop the 808 drum beats in
Yep.
909s because they just feel it. And they don't
And
it doesn't have the structure of a piano, but they can put it in and they get it, you know?
yeah, have you seen the new invention that they have now where you can basically sing or hum the melody in your head and it'll turn it into MIDI and turn it into like sounds
Notes,
almost
sounds
like a
like a voice code.
vocoder or like a uh what do you call those things? But yeah, like you can just sing your idea out and it'll put it in the DAW for you. Like
Oh
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
crazy.
I have like what are called Roland voice transformers. I have a machine called a VT3 and a VT4, and the VT3 can creates characters. It's kind of used for like voice actors. So you can
Mm.
actually I can take my voice and turn it to a female voice. I can take my a female voice and
Oh,
turn it into a male voice. It is not just a auto tune. It actually changes the nature of your voice in real time. And I actually used it to
dang.
create a character called Josephine Electric. In my band, I've
Huh.
used it for years where I can in real time actually go on a stage in New York and I have a mask and I come on like Phantom Electric Ghost. I have a Phantom mask and I have this mic and I'm going into a VT3 and I become Josephine Electric. And it
No
basically
way.
allows me to play a female voice that's my voice pitched to like a soprano, and it happens in real time. So as I'm
Now
actually
is this
singing,
analog gear or is this
it,
like what is
it's a
this?
physical piece of synthesizer gear. It's a physical machine that you hook your microphone. So you take your XLR out and put it into this box. And then the box has all kinds of controls for pitch and format and your voice.
Huh.
And you can actually select the key like A, B, C, D, E You
So
could check.
it's like a preamp or a compressor. You
It's a
just put it
total
in your
machine. Yeah, I
floor.
got a box. It's over here, but I've got two.
That's
I got
crazy.
multiple. I got like 3 of them because part of my
Is it
band was.
convincing or does it sound like it's like
Well, you
manipulated?
can listen to a lot of people thought, that Josephine was a real girl. When I came out with her, they've heard her voice and they thought that she was actually somebody else. They didn't think it was me. They thought it was somebody else.
That's funny.
And that was kind of like the biggest compliment because I'm actually using a synthesizer equipment to make a female character in my band. And she was like almost all early Phantom Electric Ghost albums have Josephine Electric name checked as a member of the band. And I've
That's
had people
awesome.
say,
That's like gorillas, right?
yeah, it was like the idea was like a gorilla idea, but they're able to do
You
it.
need to
like
have your
a real-
daughter draw her and like have like a animation
We have a
animated
drawing
character.
of her. We have a drawing that we created and we put her out. We wanted to get into animation and try to create. We've always wanted to actually make a gorilla like video and actually have like a 2D, like have a Josephine. We just
Yeah.
never had the money because we're always buying. So we never had the money to put into it because it's like, well, are we going to buy that or buy a Moog? And it's like, well, we'd
Right.
rather buy the Moog. But so we just had like this 2-dimensional drawings of her. But yeah, eventually, if we ever get bigger, our vision is to actually make a video, and actually
That's
we're going to
awesome.
have a full album that will be called Josephine Electric. And actually, the idea would be to have her as an animated character actually singing all the songs. And it's
I'm
actually me
telling
singing
you,
the song.
I'm telling you, like partner with these people. There's 3D animators now. There's a cartoonist. There's a guy that I was talking to from New York. His son started learning animation on YouTube and started animating things. And it was like, he was just messing around, but he was putting voices on it. He was honing his craft and he built up a huge fan base. And what do you know? When NFTs came out last year, he dropped his NFT.
Yeah, I probably should do that as an NFT. I need to get
Made
something
millions
like
of dollars like instantly. Like it
Yeah.
was crazy.
I need
But
to get into
yeah,
that.
I mean that whole animation piece of it is like there are now totally virtual made up characters, right? That have Instagram accounts. Like
Yeah, well, that's the idea
Michaela
with Josephine's been made up since 2016, and she's actually on albums and
Yeah.
credited. And so I could actually, I have earlier albums I could bring her back, but I have older stuff that I could just take one of those older records and convert it. I have some newer stuff I'm doing too, but yeah, I mean the whole idea is eventually we wanted to make some ghost NFTs. We were working with some partners to try to get it on. There's a couple of platforms we were looking at, but I think we actually hit our hour mark, which is pretty fast. We never know how fast we're going to hit it. But yeah, I would just love talking to you today because it's kind of a natural thing what we do. What I do is I just like to get into these natural conversations and let it go where it goes. And I think we had some fun tonight, and we were able to get your company pitch in there. Still talking about music, which is what we always like to talk about. But I'm glad that you indulged us in that. I think we had a good time.
Absolutely, I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so this is going to be out there tonight, live. It'll be permanent. The newest partner we have is Twitter, and Twitter is doing something cool with podcasts where this was shown totally on Twitter, and it's full length.
Cool.
And on the replay, when you get the link, you can actually watch the whole thing. And it's something that StreamYard does with Twitter that allows us to actually have an hour-long podcast on Twitter, which is not what you would expect, but it can be.
Very cool.
So, yeah, it's a new thing they're doing for podcasts.
That's awesome.
When we send you that link, you'll actually be able to see the whole thing. But
cool.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And
thank you.
We enjoyed talking to you. We'll get this out there for everybody on Apple and Spotify by tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Ghost, it was awesome, man. Thank you so much. We'll be following your career and cheering you on.
Well, we're always trying. We do a festival with all of our podcast guests called the Peg Bedroom Producer Festival. We're going to run it again in February. We've done twice. This will be the third one. We go for 3 days and we get all these indie bands to do 30-minute sets. And because they're friends of mine, they do it for free. And we do it for like 3 days online festival. We have bands from Australia, South Africa, Ireland, UK, everywhere.
Cool.
And it's anybody I've interviewed, and we just do like this thing on YouTube, like we're doing now through this platform. We do a live show, and people just
that's
go and do
cool.
unplugged. They go on sound stages. They provide videos. Some bands did like full video, and they submitted a video, and we ran the video. And so we're going
Nice.
to do that like in February.
That's fun.
Let me know the date.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Well, I'll look forward to that.
Thank you. Yep. Have a good night.
Cool. Yeah, you too.